I never thought I'd end up in a place like this. Flat on my back in a hospital bed, staring up at sterile white ceilings, my body broken in ways I couldn't have imagined. They told me I was lucky to be alive, that most people don't survive a fall like that. But as I lay there, numb from the painkillers and the ache of betrayal, I wondered if they were wrong. I had it all, or at least I thought I did. A beautiful wife, Emma, who I had been married to for almost a decade. We were the golden couple, or so everyone said. She had that kind of beauty that turned heads. Long, chestnut hair, green eyes that could pierce your soul, and a smile that could light up a room. And me? I was the guy who got lucky, who worked hard, made a small fortune in tech, and managed to find the love of his life along the way. We had a good life, or so I believed. A sprawling house on the outskirts of the city, a garage full of cars, my pride and joy being the silver sports car that purred like a beast under my command, and more money than we could spend in a lifetime. I thought we were happy. I thought we were solid. But maybe I should have seen the signs, the cracks in the foundation that were always there, waiting to break. Emma worked as a graphic designer, freelancing from home most of the time, while I ran my company, a startup that had grown bigger than I ever expected. It was demanding, sure, but I loved the thrill of it. I loved the adrenaline rush of closing a big deal, of watching our profits soar. Emma always said she understood. She said she loved the life we built together. And then there was Mark, my best friend since college. We were like brothers, inseparable through thick and thin. He was the only one who knew me better than I knew myself. He'd been through all the ups and downs with me, celebrated my successes, and supported me through my failures. We played basketball together every weekend, hit the bars and swapped stories like two guys who had been friends for too long to care about the usual pleasantries. Emma liked him too, maybe a little too much. I tried to ignore the little things at first, the way she laughed a little too hard at his jokes, how she seemed to light up when he entered the room, even if I was standing right next to her. I told myself it was nothing. I trusted her. I trusted him. I'd never had a reason not to. But there were moments, small, almost insignificant, where something felt off. Emma would disappear into her office for hours, claiming she had deadlines to meet. But when I'd peek in, she'd quickly close her laptop or shuffle papers around. There were hushed phone calls at odd hours. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her side of the bed cold and empty, the soft glow of her phone illuminating her face as she whispered into it, saying it was just a friend from work. And then there was Mark, who had started showing up more often even when I wasn't around. He'd be there when I got home from work, comfortably lounging on my couch, a beer in his hand, as if he owned the place. He'd joke about how he loved being in my house, loved the company. I didn't think much of it. After all, we were best friends. But there was something in the way he smiled at me, a hint of smugness that I couldn't quite place. I brushed it off. What could possibly go wrong between us? We were solid, unbreakable. At least that's what I told myself. Things only got stranger as the days went on. Emma seemed distracted, her smiles less frequent, her touch distant. She would always brush it off when I asked if something was wrong, saying she was just tired or stressed. Freelance life, she'd joke, with a tired laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. I wanted to believe her, but there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface, something she wasn't telling me. I threw myself into work, hoping that maybe things would settle down. Maybe she was just going through a phase, something that would pass. I told myself to trust her, to trust in what we had. But even at the office, I found it hard to focus. My mind kept drifting back to Emma and Mark, to the little things that were starting to pile up into something I could no longer ignore. I started to notice more, how Mark always seemed to be around, even when I hadn't invited him. How he'd drop by the house with some excuse, like picking up something he'd left behind or borrowing a book. How he always seemed to know exactly when I'd be out, as if he had some sixth sense or, more likely, an insider feeding him information. And then there was the day I came home early from work. I'd had a client meeting canceled at the last minute, and I decided to surprise Emma with lunch from her favorite cafe. I walked in quietly, hoping to catch her in one of her rare moments of relaxation. But as I stepped through the front door, I heard voices, hers and his, muffled laughter coming from the living room. I felt my stomach twist with something I didn't want to name. I stepped closer, staying quiet, listening. Emma was saying something about a trip, her voice low and excited in a way I hadn't heard in months. "It'll be perfect," she was saying. "Just us. He won't know." I felt a sharp pain in my chest like I'd been punched. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I trusted them. I had to. I walked in, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. Emma jumped a little when she saw me, her face flushing red, and Mark just gave me that easy grin, the one that had always made me feel like we were on the same team. "Hey, man," he said, standing up too quickly. "Didn't expect you back so soon." I forced a smile, trying to shake off the tension I felt tightening my muscles. Meeting got canceled. Thought I'd surprise Emma with lunch. Emma looked nervous, and her smile was forced, her eyes darting between me and Mark like she was afraid I'd noticed something. "That's sweet," she said, coming over to kiss me on the cheek. But her lips were cold, and the kiss felt like a formality. We ate lunch together, the three of us, and I tried to act like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't heard anything, but I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Just us. He won't know. What the hell were they planning? And why was she so secretive about it? A week later, I found myself staring at my phone, my heart racing. I'd installed a GPS tracking app on Emma's phone without her knowing. It felt wrong, intrusive, but I had to know. I had to be sure. Maybe it was paranoia, but I couldn't live with the doubt anymore. The little dot that represented her location flickered on my screen, and I watched as it moved steadily across the city, not towards her usual spots, not anywhere I would have expected. She was heading downtown, to a hotel I didn't recognize. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, my heart hammering in my chest. I grabbed my keys and headed out, my mind racing with questions, fears, and suspicions I didn't want to face. What was she doing? Who was she meeting? I couldn't deny it any longer. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The drive downtown felt like it lasted forever, the city blurring past me in a haze of neon lights and traffic. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my mind a whirl of confusion and dread. My thoughts spiraled, bouncing from one terrifying possibility to another, each more painful than the last. I kept telling myself I had to stay calm, that I didn't know anything for sure yet, but deep down, I knew. I knew something was terribly wrong. The hotel was one of those upscale boutique places, the kind that was all polished wood and chrome, sleek and modern. I parked my car down the street and walked over, my pulse pounding in my ears. The lobby was busy, guests checking in and out, bellboys pushing carts of luggage. I scanned the room, my eyes darting from face to face, looking for her, and then I saw them. Emma and Mark were standing by the elevators, heads close together, speaking in low voices. Emma had changed into a dress I hadn't seen before, something tight and black, that clung to her curves in a way that made my stomach twist. She was smiling, a real smile this time, the kind she used to give me, and Mark was leaning in, his hand casually on the small of her back, possessive and familiar. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The air left my lungs in a rush, and I had to grip the wall to steady myself. I wanted to charge over there, to demand an explanation, but something held me back. I didn't want to make a scene, not yet. I needed to know for sure. I needed proof. They got into the elevator together, laughing softly, and I watched as the doors closed on them, my mind screaming with questions. I waited a few moments, then headed to the reception desk, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked, "Excuse me, Can you tell me which room Ms. Emma Parker is in? I'm her husband. The receptionist looked up, a polite smile on her face. I'm sorry, sir, but we can't give out that information. I nodded, pretending to understand, but inside I was boiling over with frustration. I turned away and waited, my eyes fixed on the elevator display, watching the numbers tick up, trying to guess which floor they'd stopped at. After what felt like an eternity, the elevator doors opened again, and I slipped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, my heart pounded louder with each floor. When it stopped, I stepped out into a dimly lit hallway, listening for any sound that might lead me to them. I walked slowly, my footsteps soft on the carpet, ears straining for any sign. And then I heard it. A muffled laugh, a soft giggle coming from behind one of the doors. I moved closer, pressing my ear against the door. And that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of my wife's voice, breathy and low, saying Mark's name in a way I hadn't heard in years. I felt a sharp stab of pain, and my stomach twisted as I heard the low rumble of Mark's voice, something playful and teasing I couldn't quite make out. But then I heard her moan, soft, drawn out, and filled with a pleasure that sent a wave of nausea through me. I could feel my blood boiling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I wanted to break down the door, to confront them both, to demand answers. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stood there, frozen, listening to my world shatter piece by piece with every sound that escaped from that room. They were having sex, and there was no mistaking it. The betrayal was so raw, so palpable, that it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I don't know how long I stood there, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms, drawing blood. But finally, I turned and stumbled back towards the elevator, my heart racing, my mind a storm of fury and disbelief. I needed to get out of there before I did something I'd regret. I staggered back to my car, barely able to see through the tears blurring my vision. I punched the steering wheel over and over until my knuckles were raw and bleeding, my breath coming in ragged sobs. How could she do this to me? How could he? My best friend, the man I trusted more than anyone, betraying me in the worst possible way. I knew then that this wasn't just some fling, some meaningless affair. This was calculated, deliberate. They were planning something big, and they thought I was too blind to see it. But they were wrong. I saw everything now, and I would make them pay. I don't remember much about the drive home. The world outside my windshield was just a blur of lights and rain, a dull haze that matched the storm inside my head. I replayed every moment over and over, every smile, every laugh, every touch that had seemed so innocent before. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind? When I got home, the house felt different. It felt cold, empty, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. I dropped my keys on the table, listening to them clatter against the wood, and for a second I just stood there, staring at the darkened hallway, feeling completely lost. This was my house, my home, and yet it felt like a stranger's place now, a shell of what it had once been. I walked into the living room, sat down heavily on the couch, and let out a long breath. I needed to think, needed to figure out what to do next. My mind was racing, torn between fury and devastation, but through it all, one thought kept surfacing. I couldn't let them get away with this. I had spent my life building something real, something solid, and I wasn't going to let it all crumble because of their lies and deceit. I needed a plan. I needed to confront them, to expose them, but not like this. Not when I was still so raw, so full of anger that I could barely see straight. I needed to be smart. I needed to be patient. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I knew Emma would be home soon. She always returned late after her meetings, usually with some excuse about a client or a tight deadline. I had stopped questioning her months ago, trying to be the understanding husband, the one who didn't crowd her, didn't make her feel trapped. But all that had been a lie. She'd used my trust as a cover for her betrayal. I could feel my hands start to shake again, and I clenched them into fists, taking another deep breath. I needed to act normal, needed to pretend that I didn't know. If I was going to find out how deep this ran, I had to play it cool. I had to be the husband she thought she had fooled. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. I stayed seated, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened to her footsteps approach. She opened the door quietly as if she were trying not to disturb me. "Hey!" she called out, her voice light, almost too casual. "You still up?" I forced a smile, turning to face her as she walked in. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. "Just couldn't sleep." She came over to me, leaning down to kiss me, and I had to fight the urge to pull away, to recoil from her touch. She smelled different, perfume I didn't recognize, mingled with a faint hint of cologne that made my stomach turn. Mark's cologne. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the bile down. "How was your day?" she asked, sitting beside me, her hand resting on my thigh, too familiar, too comfortable. "It was fine," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Just the usual stuff. How about you?" She smiled, that same tired smile that had become her default lately. "Busy. Meetings back to back. Exhausting, really." She leaned back, closing her eyes, and for a moment I almost believed her. I wanted to believe her. But then I remembered the way she had laughed with him, the way she had looked at him, and I felt the anger flare up again. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I needed to keep up the charade, needed to keep her thinking I was still in the dark. But I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. I needed to act, and I needed to do it soon. I spent the next few days watching them both like a hawk, gathering evidence, piecing together the fragments of their lies. I checked her phone when she wasn't looking, scanned through her messages and emails. Most were innocuous, but there were gaps, places where she'd deleted things, thinking I wouldn't notice. But I did notice. I noticed everything now. And then there was Mark. He still came around, still played the part of the best friend, still acted like nothing was wrong. But I saw the way he looked at her, the way his eyes followed her when she moved, the way his hand would linger just a second too long on her shoulder. They were getting bolder, more confident, like they thought they'd gotten away with it, like they thought I was too blind, too trusting, too stupid to see what was right in front of me. But they were wrong. I knew I had to be patient, had to wait for the right moment. I couldn't let them know that I knew, not yet. I needed to make sure they were trapped, that there was no way out for either of them. And then I would make my move. I had always been good at strategy. That was what had made me successful in business, thinking several moves ahead, anticipating problems before they happened. Now, that same skill was what I needed more than ever. I spent the next few days plotting, piecing together my plan, making sure every detail was perfect. I wasn't going to confront them blindly, not until I had them both exactly where I wanted them. I started with small steps, things that wouldn't raise suspicion. I put a hidden camera in the living room, disguised as a new decorative piece, a gift, I told Emma, for the house. She smiled and nodded, too distracted to care. She barely noticed when I started coming home early, claiming I was taking it easy after the fall, pretending to be tired. All the while I was watching, listening, waiting for them to slip up. I also installed a keylogger on Emma's laptop. It was easy. She never bothered to log out of her accounts when she left the room. Every keystroke, every message, every secret conversation she thought was hidden was now mine. It didn't take long for me to find the evidence I needed. Their messages to each other, plans made in hushed tones, secret rendezvous disguised as work meetings. They were careful, but not careful enough. Mark was still a regular fixture at our house, always under the guise of a friendly visit. He'd chat with me about sports, the latest tech trends, all while stealing glances at Emma. I could see it in his eyes, the arrogance, the smug confidence that I was too blind to notice. But I noticed everything, every word, every look, every touch. One evening, while Emma was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, pretending to bring it to her, but glanced at the screen instead. It was a message from Mark. "I miss you already. Last night was incredible. Same time tomorrow?" My heart clenched in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I memorized the details, then put the phone down, quietly slipping back to the living room. I knew where they were meeting. I knew their pattern now, and that was all I needed. The next day, I made a show of leaving for work as usual, kissing Emma on the cheek, pretending like nothing was wrong. I watched her through the rearview mirror as I drove away, saw her wave goodbye, the smile on her lips hiding the lie beneath. I drove a few blocks, then parked my car in an alley and doubled back on foot. I knew she'd be heading out soon, and I needed to be ready. Sure enough, about an hour later, I saw her car pull out of the driveway. I waited until she was far enough ahead, then followed at a distance, keeping to the back streets, careful not to be seen. She drove straight to the hotel, the same one as before, and parked in the lot. I watched as she got out, glancing around nervously before heading inside. She didn't see me, didn't know I was there. I waited, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I wanted to storm in there, to confront them both right then and there. But I knew better. I needed to wait, to catch them in the act. I needed proof. I gave it a few minutes, then slipped into the hotel, keeping my head down, blending in with the crowd. I made my way to the elevator, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I pressed the button for the same floor I'd seen them on before. The elevator ride felt like it took forever, my stomach churning with anticipation, my hands shaking. I needed to stay calm, to keep my wits about me. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the hallway, moving slowly, quietly. I listened for any sound, any clue that would lead me to them, and then I heard it, the same soft laugh, the same low murmurs coming from a room down the hall. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my ears, my breath shallow. I took out my phone, turning on the camera, making sure it was recording. I needed to capture this, needed to have undeniable proof of their betrayal. I crept up to the door, listening, my blood boiling as I heard their voices. I heard her giggle, a sound that had once made me feel warm, now filling me with a cold, seething rage. "Mark, you're too much," she whispered, breathless. And then I heard his voice, low and teasing. "You love it, don't you? You love sneaking around like this." I gritted my teeth, feeling my anger rise, but I kept the camera steady, kept recording. I needed to see their faces. I needed them to know that I knew, that I had caught them. I waited a few more moments, listening, feeling the tension build inside me like a coiled spring. And then, in one swift motion, I turned the handle and pushed the door open, stepping inside. They both froze, eyes wide with shock and horror as they saw me standing there, camera in hand. Emma's face went pale, her mouth dropping open, and Mark just stared at me, his expression shifting from surprise to something darker, something almost amused. "Hello, Emma," I said, my voice low, steady. "Mark." Emma stuttered, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't bother," I said, holding up the phone, showing them the camera still recording. "I've got everything I need." Mark stepped forward, trying to put on his usual charm, but there was a hint of nervousness in his eyes. "Come on, man, let's talk about this." I shook my head, feeling a cold smile spread across my lips. "Oh, we're going to talk, all right. But not here. Not like this." They thought they had played me for a fool, but now it was my turn, and I wasn't going to be kind. Mark looked like he wanted to laugh, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. Emma just stood there, frozen, her hands trembling. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out what to say, how to turn this around. But there was no way out for them now. I had caught them both red-handed, and they knew it. I took a step closer, the camera still pointed at them. "You think I didn't know?" I said, my voice cold, barely restrained. "You think you could just walk into my life, take everything from me, and I wouldn't notice?" Emma swallowed hard, her eyes darting to Mark, who was still trying to maintain his composure. "Please, just let us explain," she pleaded, her voice thin, desperate. I shook my head, my jaw clenched. "Explain what, Emma? That you've been sleeping with my best friend behind my back? That you've been lying to me for months?" She started to speak, but I cut her off again. "Save it. I've heard enough. I know everything." Mark's face darkened, the smile slipping away. "So, what now?" he asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "You gonna go to the cops? Try to make some big scene?" I laughed, the sound harsh and humorless. "No, Mark, I'm not going to the cops. I'm not going to waste my time dragging this out in court. That's not how this is going to end." Emma looked terrified now, her eyes wide, her hands clutching at her sides. What do you mean?" I felt a dark satisfaction settle in my chest, the kind of cold clarity that comes from knowing exactly what you need to do. "It means you're going to pay," I said, my voice low, deliberate. "Both of you." Mark tried to keep his cool, but I could see his confidence wavering. "Listen, man, we can work this out. We're friends, right? We can figure something out." I stepped closer, feeling the rage simmer just beneath the surface, ready to boil over. "Friends? You think we're still friends after this?" He flinched, and I saw a flash of something like fear in his eyes. "Come on, don't do something stupid." I smiled, a cold, empty smile. "Too late for that," I said, taking another step closer. "The stupid thing was trusting you in the first place." I could see Emma starting to panic, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Please don't do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We didn't mean for it to happen, it just did." I felt my anger flare up again, hot and sharp. "Oh, it just happened, did it? Just like that? A few secret meetings, a few stolen moments, and suddenly it's all okay?" She started to cry, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I wanted to feel pity for her, to feel some kind of sympathy, but all I felt was a cold, hard anger that wouldn't go away. I turned to Mark, who was watching me carefully, his jaw tight. "You're a real piece of work, you know that?" I said, my voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can just take everything I have and walk away?" Mark squared his shoulders, trying to look defiant, but I could see the fear in his eyes now. "What do you want, man? Money? You want me to leave town? I'll do it. Just say the word." I laughed again, a short, bitter laugh. "Leave town? No, Mark. I don't want you to leave town. I want you to stay right here. I want you to watch as everything you've built falls apart." He paled at that, his face tightening with anger. "You don't know what you're messing with," he snapped. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm messing with. I know you're a coward, hiding behind my wife, using my money, my home, my life. But not anymore. This is the end for you, Mark." I could see the realization dawning in his eyes, the fear creeping back in. "You can't just—" I cut him off. "I can, and I will. You've underestimated me. But I'm done playing games. I have the evidence, the proof. I can ruin both of you, and I will. But first, I want to see you sweat. I want to see you both beg for mercy." Emma was crying openly now, and Mark looked like he was about to snap. I could feel the tension building, the air thick with fear and desperation. I knew I had them cornered, and it felt damn good. "I'm going to give you one chance," I said, my voice cold and steady. "One chance to tell me the truth, all of it. No more lies, no more games. And maybe, just maybe, I'll let you walk away with something left. Mark's face hardened, but I could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. He glanced at Emma, who was staring at me with a mix of fear and pleading. Fine, he said finally, his voice tight. We'll tell you everything. Just don't do anything crazy. I nodded, a small, satisfied smile tugging at my lips. That's what I thought. Now let's hear it. Every dirty, disgusting detail. And don't leave anything out. I want to know exactly how long you've been stabbing me in the back. Emma sobbed again, but Mark just sighed, resigned, knowing they had no way out. All right, he said quietly. You want the truth? You're going to get it. And as they started to speak, I felt a dark thrill settle deep in my chest. I had them right where I wanted them, and I wasn't going to stop until I'd taken everything from them, just like they'd tried to take everything from me. Mark started to talk, his voice low and measured, trying to keep control, but I could hear the tremor in his words. It started a few months ago, he began, glancing at Emma, who was staring at the floor, her face pale and tear-streaked. We never planned for it to happen, I swear. It just did. I stayed silent, my eyes locked on his, waiting for him to continue. I wanted to hear every word, every excuse, every pathetic attempt to justify their betrayal. We were drunk, he continued, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. At that party you couldn't make it to. Emma was upset. You'd been working late again and I don't know. One thing led to another. I felt my stomach churn with disgust, but I didn't let it show. So you took advantage of my wife while she was vulnerable? I asked, my voice calm but edged with steel. Mark swallowed, a flicker of shame passing over his face. I didn't take advantage. We were both there, both responsible. It wasn't just me. Emma finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen. It's true, she whispered. I was lonely. You were always at work, always so busy. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. And Mark, he was there. I felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce. So you decided the best way to handle it was to fuck my best friend? She flinched at the harshness of my words, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know I hurt you. I know it was wrong, but I didn't know how to stop. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that echoed in the small hotel room. Didn't know how to stop? That's the best you can come up with? Mark took a step forward, trying to play the mediator, the reasonable one. Look, man, we both know this isn't about just one mistake. It went further than that, yeah. We started seeing each other whenever we could, making excuses. We didn't mean to hurt you, but it happened. I shook my head, a cold smile on my lips. No, you meant to hurt me, Mark. You meant to take what was mine. And you. I turned to Emma, my voice growing colder. You meant to betray me. So don't act like you're the victim here. Emma's face crumpled, and she started to sob again, but I ignored it. I'd heard enough of her tears. Now, I wanted to see them squirm. How long? I asked, my voice sharp. How long have you been screwing around behind my back? Mark hesitated, and I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes. 6 months, he admitted quietly. Maybe a little longer. 6 months. Half a year of lies, deceit, and betrayal. I felt a fresh wave of rage wash over me, but I kept it locked down, kept my face neutral. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Why? I asked, my voice steady, cold. Why do this to me? What did I ever do to you? Mark's face hardened, his jaw tightening. You had everything, he said, his voice bitter. The perfect wife, the perfect house, the perfect life. You didn't even see how lucky you were. I envied you, all right? I wanted what you had, and when I realized I could take it, I did. I stared at him, my mind reeling. The arrogance, the entitlement, it was more than I could stomach. You wanted what I had, so you took it? That's your excuse? He shrugged, defiant. Yeah, that's my excuse. And you know what? I don't regret it. Not for a second. Emma looked at him in shock, her eyes wide. Mark, don't. But he cut her off. No, he needs to hear this. I don't regret it. I don't regret any of it. I wanted her, and I took her, and if that makes me the bad guy, so be it. I felt my blood boil, my hands shaking with fury, but I kept my voice steady. So you think you're the big man now, Mark? You think you've won? He sneered, a cruel smile on his lips. I think I've got what I wanted. You're the one who's lost everything. I took a deep breath, feeling a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. You think I've lost? Oh, Mark, you have no idea what's coming. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. He looked confused, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. What are you talking about? I smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. You're going to find out soon enough. But trust me, by the time I'm done, you're going to wish you'd never met me. You're going to wish you'd never touched her. Mark's face darkened, but I could see the fear creeping in. He was starting to realize just how deep he was in, just how badly he'd miscalculated. Emma reached out, trying to touch my arm, but I stepped back, my eyes hard. Don't, I snapped. You don't get to touch me. Not anymore. She recoiled, tears streaming down her face. Please don't do this. We can fix this. We can make it right. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Oh, there's no fixing this, Emma. There's no making this right. You've crossed a line, and there's no going back. She started to cry again, but I ignored it. I was done with her tears. I was done with both of them. You think this is over? I said, my voice low and steady. This is just the beginning. And when I'm finished, you're both going to wish you'd never crossed me. I turned and walked out, leaving them standing there, stunned and afraid. I could feel their eyes on me, feel the tension in the air, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed. And now it was time to make them pay. I drove back home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. My mind was clearer than it had been in months. The weight of uncertainty was gone, replaced by a cold, focused determination. I knew what I had to do. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, sitting at my desk in the dark, planning, strategizing, thinking through every move, every possibility. I knew their patterns now. I knew their weaknesses, and most importantly, I knew how to hit them where it hurt. The first thing I did was pull every penny out of our joint bank accounts. Emma wouldn't notice right away. She rarely checked the accounts, too busy with her secret meetings, too confident I was still in the dark. I moved the money to a new account, one only in my name, making sure there was no way she could touch it. It was my money, every cent of it. She wasn't going to live off my hard work anymore. Then, I contacted my lawyer. I'd been keeping him on standby ever since I started suspecting something was wrong, and he was ready. I told him to start the divorce proceedings, but quietly. I didn't want them to know just yet. I wanted them to keep thinking they had the upper hand, that they were still getting away with it. I wanted them to be blindsided. Next, I turned my attention to Mark. I knew where he worked. He was a sales director at a mid-sized company, and his boss was an old acquaintance of mine. I called in a favor, asked for a private meeting. I knew Mark had been skimming off the top of his deals for years, little bonuses he thought no one noticed. I'd kept that in my back pocket for a long time, thinking it was harmless. Now, it was going to be his undoing. The meeting with his boss was short and to the point. I laid out everything I knew, showed him the evidence I'd gathered over the years. The look on his face was priceless. Shock, then anger, then cold calculation. He thanked me, assured me he'd handle it discreetly, and that was that. I knew Mark wouldn't have a job by the end of the week. He'd be humiliated, disgraced, and unemployable in his field. I moved fast, lining up the pieces, setting the stage for what was to come. Emma was still blissfully unaware, going about her days as if nothing had changed, but I could see the nerves starting to show. She seemed more anxious, more on edge, probably worried about what I was planning, what I knew. I let her sweat. I let her worry. A few days later, I put the final part of my plan into action. I waited until Emma left the house, claiming she had to run errands. I knew she'd be meeting Mark, probably to discuss what had happened in the hotel room, to try and figure out what to do next. I didn't care. Let them scramble. It only made this sweeter. I went into her home office and booted up her computer. She never bothered to password protect anything. I was always the tech guy in our relationship, and she'd left it wide open. I found the folder I was looking for. Her personal files, photos, videos. I copied everything onto a flash drive, making sure I had what I needed. Then, I went to work. I sent an anonymous email to every contact in her address book, family, friends, clients, everyone. I attached the evidence of her affair with Mark, the texts, the pictures, the videos I'd found on her phone, anything that proved her deceit. I wanted everyone to know who she really was, what she had done. I sat back and waited, watching the fallout begin. The calls started coming in almost immediately. Her sister, her best friend, her clients, all shocked, all disgusted. I could see her phone blowing up with messages, watched as she desperately tried to do damage control. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back. By the time she got home, she was in tears, her face pale, her hands shaking. She burst through the door, her eyes wild, and I just sat there, calm, waiting for her to speak. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed, her voice breaking. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold satisfaction wash over me. "I just told the truth, Emma," I said, my voice steady. "I told everyone what you are, what you and Mark have been doing behind my back." She stared at me, her face a mask of horror. You ruined me," she whispered. I smiled, a dark smile. "No, Emma, you ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone knew." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, and I felt nothing but a strange sense of relief, a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was just the beginning. I wasn't done yet. The next day, the real fallout began. Mark lost his job. His boss didn't even bother with a formal termination. He was escorted out of the building by security. His reputation was in shambles, his career destroyed. I heard through mutual contacts that he'd tried calling Emma, but she didn't answer. She was too busy dealing with the wreckage of her own life, her own reputation, which was now in tatters. Her clients were dropping her left and right, disgusted by what they'd learned. And I was just getting started. I called Emma's parents, told them everything. I didn't spare a single detail. They were horrified, embarrassed, their disappointment evident. They'd always been so proud of their daughter, always thought she'd married well. Now, they knew the truth. Mark tried to reach out to me, tried to talk, to plead, but I ignored his calls. I wanted him to stew in his own mess, to realize just how deeply he'd miscalculated. I wanted him to feel every ounce of pain, every bit of humiliation that I'd felt. I had taken back control of my life, piece by piece, and I was going to make damn sure they both regretted ever thinking they could take it from me. Emma was a mess after that. I watched her crumble in real time, day by day, the strong, confident woman I'd married reduced to a wreck, haunted by the consequences of her own choices. She didn't know how to handle it, how to make things right, and she still hadn't grasped that there was no right left for her to find. She tried to apologize again, tried to reason with me, but I wasn't interested in her apologies. She could see the coldness in my eyes, the resolve, and I think it terrified her. She begged me to stop tearing her life apart. "Please, just let it go," she pleaded one night, her voice hoarse from crying. "We can figure something out. We don't have to do this." I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "Why should I stop?" I asked quietly. "You didn't stop when you decided to screw my best friend. You didn't stop when you lied to me every day for 6 months. Why should I give you mercy?" She had no answer for that. She just sat there, crying, and I turned away, disgusted. The next morning, I found her packing a suitcase. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice calm, as if we were discussing something mundane. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. I need to get away," she whispered. "I can't stay here. Not with you." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. "Go then," I said. "Get out. You're not my problem anymore." She hesitated for a moment, as if she were waiting for me to say something else, something to stop her. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching as she finished packing, my face expressionless. She left that afternoon without another word, slamming the door behind her. I watched from the window as she drove away, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't quite place. Relief, anger, a strange kind of emptiness. I thought I'd feel triumphant, victorious, but instead, there was just nothing. Just a quiet void where my marriage had once been. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had one last piece of business to handle. Mark. He hadn't stopped calling, hadn't stopped trying to reach out to me. I'd ignored him long enough. It was time for a final reckoning. I called him, told him to meet me at a bar downtown, one we used to frequent back when things were simple, back when we were real friends. He agreed, sounding almost relieved, like he thought this was his chance to make amends. But I had other plans. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in a corner booth, nursing a drink. He looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, his hair disheveled, his clothes wrinkled. He looked up when he saw me, and for a moment I saw a flash of hope in his eyes. But I wasn't there to give him hope. I slid into the booth across from him, my expression cold. "Mark," I said simply, nodding. "Hey, man," he began, his voice tentative. "Look, I know things got out of hand. I know I screwed up. But we were friends once, right? Can't we try to fix this?" I stared at him, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "Fix this?" I repeated, my voice flat. "There's no fixing this, Mark. You crossed a line. You went after my wife, my life. You thought you could take everything from me and walk away unscathed." He winced, looking down at his drink. "I know," he muttered. "I know I was wrong. But come on, we've known each other for years. Doesn't that mean something?" I leaned in, my eyes locked on his. "It meant something, once, but not anymore. Not after what you did." He swallowed hard, looking desperate. "So what now? You're just gonna cut me out of your life? Just like that?" I smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "No, Mark, I've already done that. But there's one last thing I need from you." He frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" I leaned closer, my voice low. "I want you to disappear. Leave town. Leave this city. And never come back. You're done here." His face paled. "You can't be serious." I nodded slowly. "I am. You've lost everything. Your job, your reputation. There's nothing left for you here. So do yourself a favor and get out." He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You think you can just tell me to leave? You think you have that kind of power?" I leaned back, feeling a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. "I don't think, Mark, I know. You've burned every bridge you had here. I've made sure of that. If you stay, you'll have nothing. No job, no friends, no life. So go. Start over somewhere else. That's your only option." He sat there for a long moment, his face a mix of anger and fear. Then, finally, he nodded, defeated. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll go. But don't think this makes you a better person than me. You're just as ruthless as I am." I shrugged, unfazed. "Maybe. But the difference is, I didn't betray my best friend." He flinched at that, looking away. "You've won," he said quietly. "Are you happy now?" I considered the question for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, Mark, I am." I stood up, tossed a few bills on the table for his drink, and walked out without another word. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew he was done. I'd won. I'd taken back my life, my dignity, my power. And I'd made them both pay for what they did to me. I should have felt triumphant, victorious. But as I walked down the dark streets, feeling the cool night air on my face, I realized something. Revenge had cost me more than I'd thought. It had taken everything I had left, my trust, my faith, my sense of who I was. And now there was nothing left but a hollow emptiness. But at least, I told myself, I was free. I thought it was over. I thought I'd done everything I needed to do, taken every step to reclaim my life, to make them pay. Emma was gone, Mark was out of town, and I was free, free from the lies, the betrayal, the poison that had seeped into everything I loved. I had my house, my money, my company. I had my freedom. But it didn't feel like enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing, that there was a piece of the puzzle I hadn't accounted for. The nights were the worst, filled with an uneasy silence that gnawed at my insides. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this emptiness would ever go away, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. Then came the call that would change everything. It was late, nearly midnight, and I'd just come back from a long, aimless drive around the city, trying to clear my head. The phone rang, cutting through the stillness of the house like a knife. I grabbed it, frowning at the unknown number. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice rough from disuse. There was a pause, a crackling on the other end, and then a voice, familiar but faint, weak. "It's me," Emma whispered. Her voice was shaky, trembling, and I could barely hear her. I felt a jolt of anger flare up inside me. "What do you want, Emma?" I snapped, my patience already worn thin. I need your help," she said, her voice breaking. "Please." I wanted to hang up right there. I wanted to tell her to go to hell, to deal with whatever mess she'd gotten herself into on her own. But something in her tone, something desperate, terrified, made me pause. "What's going on?" I asked, against my better judgment. She hesitated, and I could hear her breathing, shallow and erratic. "I'm in trouble," she whispered. "I made a mistake, a big one." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "You think?" "No, you don't understand," she pleaded. "I borrowed money. From some people, bad people." My stomach twisted, a cold knot of dread settling there. "What kind of people, Emma?" She was crying now, her voice barely a whisper. "Loan sharks. I was desperate. After everything fell apart, I had nowhere to go. No money, no job. I thought I could pay them back, but—" I closed my eyes, feeling the anger drain out of me, replaced by a strange, cold fear. "How much, Emma?" I asked quietly. 50,000, she choked out. I couldn't pay, and now, they're coming for me. I sat down, the weight of her words sinking in. I should have told her it wasn't my problem, that she'd made her bed and now she had to lie in it. But despite everything, I couldn't ignore the fear in her voice, the real, visceral terror that told me this was no game. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice steady. She gave me an address, somewhere on the rougher side of town, and I sighed, feeling the old resentment bubble up again. "Stay there," I said. "I'll come get you." I hung up, grabbed my coat, and headed out the door, cursing myself for being so weak, so stupid. But I had to see this through, had to know what she'd gotten herself into this time. The drive was short, but felt like it took forever. I found the place, a rundown motel, the kind of place you wouldn't stay at unless you had no other choice. I spotted Emma huddled near a door, her face pale and drawn, eyes wide with fear. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I got out of the car and approached her slowly. "What the hell were you thinking?" I asked, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. She flinched, looking down at her hands. "I wasn't," she whispered. "I was scared. I didn't know what else to do." Before I could say anything else, a car screeched to a stop behind us. Two men stepped out, big and rough-looking, their eyes hard. My heart sank as they approached, one of them pulling out a baseball bat, slapping it against his palm. "That her?" the man with the bat asked, his voice gruff. I nodded, trying to keep my voice calm. "Yeah, but she's with me now. I'll take care of her debt." The second man laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "That's not how this works, buddy. She owes us, and she pays, one way or another." Emma whimpered, shrinking back against the wall. I felt a surge of protectiveness rise up in me, despite everything, and I stepped between her and the men. "Look," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I have the money. I'll pay you, but you leave her alone. Deal?" The man with the bat grinned. "Deal," he said, his eyes glinting with something cruel. But as I reached for my wallet, the second man lunged, swinging the bat. I barely dodged it, stumbling back as they came at me, fists flying. I fought back, adrenaline surging, but they were too many, too strong. I felt the bat crack against my ribs, a sharp, blinding pain, and I went down hard. Emma screamed, a high, desperate sound that cut through the night. "Stop!" she cried, rushing forward. "Please, just stop!" But they didn't stop. They kept coming, kept hitting, kicking, until I was on the ground, barely conscious, blood running from my mouth. I could hear Emma's voice, pleading, crying, but it was distant, fading. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital again, tubes in my arms, my body aching all over. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, to remember what had happened. I felt a hand on mine and turned to see Emma sitting beside me, her face streaked with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for any of this." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. "It's always the same with you, Emma," I murmured, my voice weak. "Always a mess, always chaos." She squeezed my hand, desperate. "I'll make it right, I promise. I'll do whatever it takes." I pulled my hand away, staring up at the ceiling. "There's nothing left to make right," I said quietly. "We're done, Emma. You need to go." She sat there for a moment, silent, and then, finally, she nodded, standing up slowly. "I'm sorry," she whispered one last time, before turning and walking out the door. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of finality, a strange peace settling over me. I'd been broken, beaten, but I was still here. I'd survived. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing. I was done with the past. Done with Emma. Done with everything that had dragged me down. I was ready to start over, to find a new path, whatever that looked like. As I lay there, the hospital room quiet around me, I felt a flicker of hope. Small, tentative, but real. I'd been to hell and back, but I was still standing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now.